You think you know the story, but what if the fairy tale was built on a silence so calculated, so deliberate, that the truth was never meant to survive? What if the most explosive chapter wasn't hidden by accident, but erased on purpose?
Markle's ex-husband, Trevor Engelson, got back in contact with the fake Duchess.
He does mention that she looked pregnant in the article, but he says that's me.
That she demanded her husband Trevor pay for a personal trainer and a nutritionist to help her bounce back.
Your ex, and he's like, yup, and I'm like, I go, you think she's gonna close? And he's like, oh, she'll close. And I don't want to get into more.
Multi-ethnic, and she's been married. She already has a kid from someone, or divorced. I mean, everything. You're not supposed to be in a Catholic family or whatever.
It's from 1997 of Rachel Meghan Markle, who had given birth to a child, but the records had been...
And it seems like she'd convinced him that they needed to marry, and they needed to marry quickly.
Yes, I wonder if it's because...
All attempting to turn on his ex-wife, the woman who, let's just remember, he would...
Also ironed out childcare details in order to ensure that Engelson was happy to pay for a nanny to help her.
But a double Markle glow at the most recent appearance of the Harkles at the United Nations when Harry was giving his speech.
The royal family know. Did Mr. Markle know?
Are their children even real? So why do these rumors continue to persist, and what is behind them? And so
it's determinedness that almost, I would say, mercenary, cold-blooded. She'd set her sights on something.
Trevor Engelson, a film producer, but they split in August 2013. They were together for 9 years and married for...
His first wedding to a TV producer named Trevor Engelson took place at a beachfront resort 7 years ago. Meghan's first trip
on Friday, which shows their children. 4-year-old daughter Lilibet and 6-year-old son Archie. Happy.
She had an entanglement, just like Jada Pinkett Smith, that she became entangled.
Obsessive, who Meghan has manipulated by sending her free product, but I still found this...
Look closely, because this is where the cracks begin to show. The early years, those conveniently blurred, softly packaged as self-discovery and finding her voice. Sounds poetic, doesn't it? But what if that poetic language is just smoke? Because behind the carefully chosen words, there's an unsettling absence of detail. No concrete timeline, no anchored truth, just vague floating fragments that don't quite connect. And insiders, quiet, cautious, but consistent, keep pointing in the same direction. Those missing years weren't empty. They were occupied, intensely occupied. And then a name surfaces. Not a celebrity, not a producer, not someone glamorous enough to fit the narrative. A regular guy. Joe Giuliano. The kind of name that doesn't belong in headlines but refuses to stay buried. Why does a name like that keep resurfacing in hushed conversations? Why does it echo in places where reputations are protected and secrets are currency? Because sealed doesn't mean erased, it just means delayed. Think about it. If everything was as simple as the official story claims, why the need for such precision? Why the layers of silence? Because what's being hidden isn't just inconvenient, it's disruptive. It doesn't just tweak the narrative, it shatters it.
Sometimes her ex-husband, I'm sure
Meghan's?
Yes, I met him like personally. We were supposed to,
A teenage marriage. Quick, quiet, Las Vegas. No witnesses who matter, no cameras, no trace that can easily be followed. And just as quickly as it appears, it disappears. Annulled, sealed, filed away into a system designed to forget. But here's the thing about decisions made in a rush, they often leave behind something unaccounted for, something that doesn't fit neatly into legal paperwork. Because this isn't where the story ends. This is where it mutates. The whispers don't stop at a secret marriage, they go further, much further. They point to something that can't be erased with documents or silence. A child, a girl, a life that continued quietly while another life was being constructed in public view. Her name, Noel. And suddenly, everything starts to feel different. Those missing years don't feel like gaps anymore, they feel like clues. Because if Noel exists, then the timeline isn't just incomplete, it's misleading. A whole chapter wasn't just skipped, it was hidden.
More and more digging in the alleged teen pregnancy, and the findings are shocking. And even her cousin...
Chicago, far from the cameras, far from Hollywood ambitions. A girl growing up in a place where no one is looking for royal connections. But people notice things. They always do. A resemblance that's too strong to ignore. Familiar features, familiar presence. Always there, but never explained. Not introduced, not acknowledged. Just accepted in silence. And silence like that, it's It's not accidental, it's enforced. Because if you start connecting the dots, something uncomfortable emerges. A pattern, strategic absence, carefully timed disappearances, visits that were never publicized, movements that didn't match the story being told. And insiders, those who have seen enough to question, suggest those weren't coincidences. They were visits, returns, moments of connection kept strictly off record. Now ask yourself this, how long can something like that stay hidden? Because time doesn't freeze, it moves forward relentlessly. If the timeline holds, if the whispers are even partially true, then Noel isn't a child anymore. She's grown, living her own life, possibly even raising a family of her own. Let that sink in, because suddenly the narrative shifts from secret daughter to something even more explosive, a grandmother, allegedly. And the contrast? It's almost impossible to ignore. On one side, carefully curated images of motherhood, interviews, podcasts, speeches about authenticity and family, a global image built on transparency. And on the other side, a completely separate branch of the same family tree existing quietly, without acknowledgement, without connection. That's not just irony, that's tension, the kind that builds pressure, because the more polished the public image becomes, the more glaring the hidden parts feel. The more the story is told, the more people start asking what isn't being said. And here's where things get even more unsettling. This wasn't random, this wasn't chaotic. According to those who followed closely, there was always a plan, a vision, something structured, intentional, even calculated, a vision board, a target, a destination mapped out long before it ever became reality. And suddenly, the narrative of chance begins to fall apart, because nothing about this feels accidental anymore. Not the relationships, not the timing, not the silence, which brings us to the one figure who has never broken rank. Never spoken, never confirmed or denied. Trevor Engelson. He was there before the transformation, before the reinvention, before the global spotlight. He saw the early version, the unfiltered one, the one that existed before the narrative was perfected. And according to those closest to him, he remembers everything. So why is he silent? Because silence, in this case, isn't weakness, it's power. The kind of power that comes from knowing more than you're willing to say. The kind that keeps everyone else on edge, watching, waiting, wondering what happens if that silence ever breaks. And that's the real tension in this story. Not just what's been said, but what hasn't. Because every rumor, every resurfacing name, every quiet voice from Chicago, it all circles back to one question. What does Trevor know that the world doesn't? And more importantly, how long can that silence actually last? And here's where the story stops feeling like rumor and starts feeling like pressure building behind a locked door that's beginning to crack. Because silence, no matter how controlled, no matter how strategic, has a lifespan. And the longer it's held, the more volatile it becomes. You can see it in the way details are starting to slip, not in headlines, not in official statements, but in conversations. Quiet ones. The kind that don't feel important at first. A comment here, a memory there, someone remembering something they weren't supposed to remember out loud. And suddenly, the structure that once felt airtight starts to look fragile. Look at Chicago again. That quiet, ordinary setting that never asked to be part of a global narrative. People there aren't performing for cameras. They're not building brands, they're just remembering. And memory is dangerous when it doesn't align with the official version of events. Because multiple accounts, subtle, careful, but consistent, describe the same thing. A girl who was always present but never introduced. Not a guest, not an outsider. Someone who belonged but whose belonging was never supposed to be questioned. That's not gossip, that's pattern recognition. And patterns, once they form, are hard to ignore, especially when they start connecting across years, across locations, across people who have no reason to coordinate their stories. It's like watching separate puzzle pieces suddenly lock into place without anyone forcing them. The resemblance, the timing, the unexplained gaps, the quiet visits, the sealed records. On their own, each detail is dismissible. Together, they become something else entirely, something that doesn't sit comfortably. Because now there's another layer creeping in, the digital one. And this is where things get truly unpredictable. You can seal a courtroom, you can bury paperwork, but you can't erase a life lived in the modern world. School records, photos, social traces, the ordinary breadcrumbs every person leaves behind without even thinking about it. They don't disappear, they wait. And all it takes is one person, one search, one connection, and suddenly the past isn't buried anymore. It's searchable. That's the part that changes everything. Because if Noel exists the way the whispers suggest, then she doesn't just exist in memory. She exists in data. And data doesn't stay hidden forever. It circulates. It gets discovered. It gets shared, quietly at first, then all at once. And that's when silence stops being protection and starts becoming liability. Now step back and look at the bigger picture. This isn't just about one person anymore. This is about an entire structure built on a specific version of reality, a version that has been repeated, refined, and reinforced over time. And structures like that, they rely on consistency, on every piece aligning perfectly. Because the moment one piece doesn't fit, the entire thing starts to wobble. That's why the stakes feel so high. Not because of embarrassment, not because of scandal in the traditional sense, but because of contradiction. Because if even a fraction of this is true, it introduces a version of events that doesn't just add to the story, it competes with it. And competing narratives don't coexist peacefully. One eventually overtakes the other. Now think about the timing. Why now? Why are these details gaining traction after years of silence? Because pressure doesn't build forever without consequence. The longer something is contained, the more force it carries when it starts to leak. And right now, it's leaking. Not explosively, not dramatically, but steadily, persistently. And the most unsettling part? No one is officially denying it in a way that shuts it down completely. There's distance, there's avoidance, but not definitive closure. And in a story like this, that absence speaks louder than any confirmation ever could. Then there's the emotional core of it all, the part that doesn't rely on documents or timelines or insider whispers, the human part. Because if there is a woman out there who grew up watching her biological mother become a global figure, watching interviews about truth, about identity, about empowerment, while carrying a truth of her own that was never acknowledged publicly, what does that do over time? What does that silence feel like? Because silence isn't empty. It's heavy. It builds. It shifts. And eventually, it demands release. And that's the variable no one can control. Not the palace, not the PR teams, not even the people who originally chose to stay quiet. Because when a story belongs to more than one person, it only takes one of them to decide the silence is over. That's the real turning point waiting in the background. And Trevor, he's still there, still silent, still watching. And that silence after everything feels less like restraint and more like timing. Because the longer he says nothing, the more everything else says something for him. Every rumor, every resurfacing detail, every inconsistency, it all amplifies the weight of what he might know. And here's the uncomfortable truth. People don't walk away from opportunities like his without a reason. Not just money, not just attention, but validation. The chance to define the narrative instead of watching it be rewritten. And yet, he's chosen not to take it. Over and over again. That's not random, that's deliberate. Because the moment he speaks, the dynamic changes. The speculation ends. The ambiguity collapses. And everything becomes very, very real. So he waits. And while he waits, the world inches closer on its own. The Chicago connections grow louder. The digital traces become easier to follow. The questions become sharper. And the story, the one that was supposed to stay buried, keeps resurfacing in ways that feel less like coincidence and more like inevitability. Because that's what this has become. Not a rumor, not even just a controversy, but a slow-moving revelation that hasn't fully arrived yet, but feels like it's on its way. And when it does, when whatever version of the truth finally steps into the light, it won't feel sudden. It will feel like something people have been sensing all along, but couldn't quite prove. That's the tension sitting underneath everything. The sense that this isn't finished, that the silence isn't permanent, that the missing pieces aren't gone, they're just waiting to be seen. And the most unsettling part of all, the story doesn't need to be confirmed to keep growing. It just needs to keep not disappearing. Because as long as the questions remain, as long as the names keep resurfacing, as long as the timeline refuses to fully make sense, this doesn't end. It escalates.